Okay, so now I've positioned the plane a little bit more in line with what I want. I've made some simple cubes to match a few of the buildings, and they seem to be sticking relatively well. Again, it's going to be hard to get a spot on pixel by pixel, you know, but if it works for the most part, you can adjust a little bit in Photoshop. So now we're going to switch to mental ray, and then what we want to do is, what I like to use is the mental ray sun and sky, physical sun and sky. So click create. This is going to basically create a sun and an exposure node called simple exposure. The sun is basically a directional light that is hooked up uh, to a few other bells and whistles. So the positioning of the light in terms of like up down does not matter, but the rotation of it is where you'll actually get the direction of the sun source. So again, only the rotation really matters, but I like to move it so that it starts to approximate where my sun comes from. And now if we render, you'll see what you get out of the box. So it's a very naturalistic renderer, and then basically what I'm going to try to do now is, using these boxes as the approximation of the buildings in the scene, is to get our lighting angle correct. So then you can see under the light there's an MIA physical sun. Under our camera there's an MIA exposure simple. And I put together a PDF to explain. I like to swap out the exposure simple to the exposure photographic. The exposure photographic actually just gives a much more verbose and more camera appropriate uh, numerics. So we will go over that really briefly. It seems more involved than it is, but if you just bear with me. So go to the hypergraph connections with your camera selected. You'll see the exposure simple. There's our physical sky. I'm just going to move this down. And then basically open up Hypershade. So window, rendering, Hypershade. And then under mental ray lenses, you'll see the exposure photographic node. Now that pops up. Again, we're in the hypergraph input output. And basically middle mouse drag to the camera and use default to route it. And then basically do the same. We'll middle mouse drag onto the MIA physical sky. And then we'll want other. Click that. And then you'll get this connection editor. And we want to make sure the left and right displays have show hidden. Right display, show hidden. So now on the left, you want message. And then on the right, you actually want the MIA sky exposure. Once you select it, it's hooked up. You can see the outputs are there. The MIA simple no longer has any. You can delete it. And then now if we click on it, you can see what we get. You basically get a film, camera shutter, f-stop, much more what we're used to for our aspects. Now with that, we'll have to switch our color aspects. So our RGB is 3.18 in the physical sun and sky to deal with this exposure photographic node correctly. So again, RGB 0.318. Now if we go back to our exposure photographic, these are all the various things. And now we want to make a mental ray material. So we want the MIA material X right on the top, right there. So this will be our base shader. Everything will be selected with it. So again, right click, assign material to shader. Click color. We'll rename it first. MIA basic or base shader. Now let's map to the color. Now we'll also need a utility called the gamma correct. Again, this is just to get everything on the correct color space for that photographic node. So it's 0.454, 0.5454, 0.454. So on the sun, it's 0.318. On the shaders, I'm just giving it a medium gray value. And then I'm going to lower its glossiness down a little bit. And you can see the specular highlight on the sphere went down a little bit. Now I'm just assigning everything. And now let's do a test render. So now everything is in that correct color space. And now let's go back to Photoshop, and we're going to open up that original Chicago image. Open. This is where, if you go File, File Info, this is actually where we talked about before. This is important. We can find out what camera shot this, what shutter speed, what f-stop, what ISO rating, what focal length of a camera lens was used. See, 7.1, 400, 24 millimeter, 1/1200th of a 50th second. So now this is where, if you go to your camera, tab over till you get to you want to update the camera settings just to make sure it's locked in. Here's your exposure. So ISO, we're going to make 400. And, this may not get it exactly, but we're using that data. So now f-stop 7.1. Let me just test it. I haven't done the shutter speed yet, but just to see the difference. And now you can see how much brighter our scene is. And that's because it's taken in that information. And then now we want to do the shutter, 1250. Oh, wait. I think I did on the ISO instead. So hang on 1 second. Yep. So back to 400 here, and then camera shutter, 1250. Now do a render. Now for the most part, this should reflect the camera settings for the lighting. And then basically now we just make sure that the light direction is matching. And then you can double check back in Photoshop. Close this out. Oh, the lens, 24 millimeters. Just have to know that we have to change our camera. Go up to focal length. Now I have 36, and the reason it's 36 is this camera was not a full body camera. So basically digital lenses, unless it's a full body, don't match up 1:1. So full frame. So basically what it ends up being is we need to times the lens by 1.5. So 1.5 times the lens millimeter. And in this case, the lens millimeter is 24. So what it ends up being is a focal length of 36. And that's what we get there.